City of Somerville's Communications Department, and this is Alderman at Work. Today's guest is Alderman at Large Jack Connolly. Alderman Connolly has served on the Board of Aldermen for more than 30 years, first as a Ward Alderman from Ward 6, and then in an at-large position. Alderman Connolly was born and raised here in Somerville, and as a Davis Square resident and business owner was very engaged with the Red Line coming to the neighborhood and has remained involved in development and changes that have gone on over time in the neighborhood. Alderman Connolly is currently the chair of the board's Public Health and Public Safety Committee and the Senior Services Committee. He's the vice chair of the Veterans and Public Services Committee and serves on the Legislative Matters, Licenses and Permits, and the Special Rodent Issues Committee. Probably your favorite. Welcome to the show, Alderman Connolly.
Oh, Megan, it's a joy to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, have you lived in Davis Square your whole life, or?
I've lived at pretty much Ball Square growing up, and that around 19, I was in school, stayed back and forth commuting to Boston College, and then in 1974, I had the good fortune to be able to buy a house in Davis Square at 23, and I did pay attention to the business professors and bought the house with $3,000 to my name, and I signed that note, and 3 friends moved in. We had bachelor's 4 for 10 years, and I met my wife, and she turned the house into a home. So now the values around Davis Square make that probably the best investment I ever made, and who would have known it back then?
Yeah, so as obviously a long-term Davis Square resident and a business owner, you were there for the Red Line coming in the mid-'80s, and as well as all the development that came around with that. And I was wondering what your impressions were of sort of the process and the planning around that versus some of the things that are going on now around development in Davis Square, as well as with the coming transit stops around the city.
Oh, very easy, Megan, because back then, now remember, this the mid-'70s with planning for the Red Line was going on. Mm-hmm. S. Lester Ralph's administration, Carla Johnson, a lot of people were very active in trying to convince then Governor Dukakis that Davis Square needed to stop. Originally, it was supposed to go out to Lexington and Arlington. People out there didn't want it, so we all went running into the governor and said, listen, you got to come under Davis Square. Why not put a station there? And the governor said, you know what, it makes sense. We'll probably save a few dollars not going all the way out there. Mm-hmm. This station opened in 1984. But the only means of communication were literally a mimeograph machine, post notices, and the then only weekly newspaper, the Somerville Journal. So people would meet on a regular basis and actually help plan for the construction and for the opening. And it took us a good 7 or 8 years. And when it opened, it still took a good 6 or 7 years for the square to develop, build the Harvard Vanguard building, 212 Elm Street, where the Citizens Bank is now, and to basically reshape the square. So it's been an ongoing, involving process. Mm-hmm. Social media has helped that hugely now. Much easier to get the word out instead of notes on the library wall or telephone poles around the square that there's a meeting about the Red Line. So we've come a long way, but it makes the process even more open to people now, which is tremendous because we do have a lot of activity and people getting involved now, especially for the sort of the re-engineering of Davis Square that has to happen now.
Yeah, and it sounds like at the time a lot of the planning kind of happened after the fact, as opposed to some of the work the planning department and a lot of residents are trying to do now to plan sort of before things happen.
Yeah, you have an opportunity now to have a little bit more of a visual of what could be, thanks to all the technology, the CAD/CAM stuff that you can conceptually look at possibilities, where before we had to wait for an architect to do some renderings and then, well, those maybe don't look right, let's go back. Then a month later you come back. So the process was slow but deliberate. And sure. In many cases, I'd say we did a very good job around Davis Square with what we decided to do, keeping the height limits of the building at 50 feet where it still is, and may change for a little bit down the road. But we basically, the whole premise was, Megan, to keep the residential homes and buildings and apartments close to Davis. We didn't sprawl up Holland College or down Elm Street and let business sort of sprawl into neighborhoods. It worked the other way. There are still many units in their apartments. There are apartments over the Tedeschi's right there in front of Statue Park where people live. So we've done a good job of keeping the residences not only around but in Davis.
Sure. So you've served both as a ward alderman representing the Davis Square area, and then later ran for an at-large position. How do you think representing a neighborhood got you ready to serve citywide?
It was the best training one could possibly have because, number one, you focused on the real micro issues in a ward, a neighborhood, or even just on the end of one street, which really gave you the opportunity to know how vital work might be for that one street, that one neighborhood. And so to be at large now with that perspective, now I've got a macro view, and having a lot of background with municipal finance management, it's a lot easier to see a bigger picture and to see from a broad perspective. Having that 20 years experience as a ward guy and having to deal with the MBTA, having to deal with Tufts University, having to deal with the most vibrant square in the city, kept me real busy, but it's also given me a wonderful perspective, especially as we do the Union Square zoning, then the planning for the citywide zoning, the summer vision activities, coupled with my knowledge, has really been a tremendous involvement, and it really gives me a great perspective.
You had mentioned, how social media and advances in technology have now made it easier for folks to get involved and to kind of spread the word. And I see that you're always very active on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, I think. But I know you also brought in a postcard. So,
well, you know what?
Are those old school ways of communicating?
It might be old school, but Megan, this is the right school.
Right.
I've had these distributed through local magazine Scout. There are inserts in there to different parts of the city, and they'll be coming out over the course of the summer. But to a lot of people, I got an issue when this is sitting in front of them. You know what? I'm going to write a little note, and this particular individual concerned about zoning and is also very concerned about making the city more bike-friendly. Sure. Just a couple of scribbles and a stamp. And so now I get this. Now I physically know what's going on. This guy left me an email, which I can respond to, and it's a connection. There are some people who, 50s, 60s, may not be quite as tech-savvy. This is just one other way. Those other social media efforts are certainly there. So hopefully I can reach anybody who is very social media conscious, and some folks being involved with seniors. And at 66 now, I guess I can say I'm a senior myself. But
I think you count, yeah.
I know that I can reach people that way. And the most important thing is getting the message across and getting it to you. So if it comes to me this way or comes to me electronically, that's fine, as long as I get the message.
Yeah, it's great to have all of those different options there for folks to kind of reach them wherever they are.
And people do, and right now, with email being so easy, people think nothing of not only sending a message to you, but linking dozens of other people. So the email traffic that gets generated, the old days, you'd measure, geez, I had 10 phone calls on that issue. Now, I've got 45 emails in 2 days on that. That's how you measure the popularity of an issue. Phone calls are almost rare these days. Emails are messages in so many different formats. Facebook postings, messages happen all the time, and trying to manage the time is the big issue for any alderman, ward guy, or at large.
Yeah, and there is obviously a lot going on in the city that people are interested in, and I'm sure you're contacting you as well as the other colleagues on the board, as well as all the things going on locally. Somerville is also affected by regional and even national issues. One of them being the Opioid Crisis. We are certainly not immune to that. And I know with your work on the Public Health and Public Safety Committee, that's an issue that you have been looking at. So, could you share some of the things that have been going on?
Sure.
Around that?
One of the great things that has happened is we have a very involved group of different parents and recovery groups or people who have formed association to deal with opioid crisis, and we've got a great network of individuals here. The city has made major efforts not only in dealing with the opioid issue, but dealing with suicide prevention. Corey Mashburn has just been tremendous with the work that he does, and I think we've been able to harness a lot of information. It's difficult because it's a regional and to some extent a national problem with the influx of the opioids coming here into Somerville, but we've had a very good response with the police department, who aren't arresting people for these addictions, but are basically helping get treatment. We have a person working at the police station itself, so if an officer identifies somebody who's had a problem, they're going to try and, number one, find a place for that individual, find the resources we have through the different recovery groups we have here in the city. So we're making great strides that way. We're linked in with other communities and with some of the facilities in the area, special rehab places that can work with people afterwards. We manage that carefully, and it's an ongoing effort and one that we pledged to put a lot of time and energy. And for me, it's just a real personal mission, because I've known, sadly, victims of these addictions personally, and that so there's a real effort on behalf of many of us to make sure that we're trying to eliminate as best we can the problem.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, you know, there's really been kind of a shift in treating it as a health issue as opposed to a crime issue, and as well as trying to address, you know, people's mental health issues and some of the root causes that they may have ended up using these drugs in the first place.
Yeah, we do have a good linkage with the Cambridge Health Alliance, with the local hospitals, and with basically the mental health community as well for resources. We have our trauma team, as you know, Patty Contente does a terrific job with the Trauma Response Network, and that if there's a problem somewhere, we have people who are literally minutes away from trying to help and recommend resources and coordinate with our police or our EMTs or paramedics who respond to these situations. We're fortunate, and that network is improving all the time. My committee works closely with all these providers, and it's something that we're going to always improve on, and we're continuing doing that, and that we're making great strides here, because Somerville's only 4 miles square. It's real easy to connect with people and to let people know. Thanks to social media, it's a lot easier to communicate these days.
Sure. Another regional issue that you know, Somerville has definitely been hit by is the issue of affordable housing and rising real estate and rent prices. This has kind of happened across the whole Boston region, and I know there are a lot of, you know, different approaches and things going on around that, an issue that you definitely care about. So I was wondering if you could, again, talk a little bit about some of the work going on around that.
Sure. Basically, and I think it's fair to say, the affordability crisis, because there are so many people that I've contacted who, when they mention, geez, I'm being priced out of the city where I grew up. I've got people been here 25, 30, 40 years who say, you know what, I just can't afford to make it. I'm on a fixed income, now I've retired, and geez, my costs are going up. So we hear that quite frequently. And this isn't just a greater Boston problem. This is as much of a problem in San Francisco, New York, Philadelphia. Everybody wants to be in the cities now.
Right.
We've got 50 million reasons why the Green Line is going to be coming here to Union Square and to the city, but everybody doesn't want to be commuting an hour and a half. They'd like to be in the city and avail themselves of public transportation. There's only so many housing units in the city, and the cost of living be what it is. So we, like a few communities, have really stepped up, and we've made that 20% requirement for anybody who has more than 7 units of housing. 20% of it has to be the affordable range according to the HUD guidelines. Mm-hmm. And so for every new development coming along, that's a big step, but it's just only one step. We must make sure that Cambridge, Boston, and other regional entities are working with us, because we can't be the only one doing the 20% affordable. Other communities have to do the same to help offset that. So it's one of the ongoing issues we have here. We've got a very good relationship with the community corporation here in the city, who have passionately advocated for these affordability issues, and we're very pleased to work along with them. The real issue, Meghann, is in the 1, 2, and 3 family homes, where people are being priced out because of the cost. A lot of people are improving their houses because they're 80 years old, but they got to do the electrical, plumbing, and all this, and it's not cheap to do those things. So when they make these big major improvements and fix the house up, make it safe, now all of a sudden costs go up, and like I said, people being on fixed incomes, they've got a real dilemma, and unless there's multiple family members that contribute, people sadly find this position where they can't stay and spend their lives here, as a lot of people want to do, and that's the frustration we have. So the affordability issue is one that we're all collectively working on. I know the mayor and his folks in the Planning Community Development Office are right there with us, trying to work with the region and solve these issues.
Yeah, and I know that was a big issue, you know, doing some of the pre-planning in Union Square, as well as some of the other locations that'll be around the coming Green Line stops. Was certainly an issue that many residents, the alderman, the mayor, were interested in trying to address before those stops came in and prices, go up even more.
Displacement is the term that I think you hear pretty frequently now, that people who have spent 30, 40, 50 years here all of a sudden find themselves having to make an economic change, not of their doing. The fact the city's been successful in rebuilding and renovating, there's a cost to that, and it's sadly the ability for someone to maintain and afford. The federal government isn't building any new housing. State government isn't building any new housing. Somerville Housing Authority is very restricted in what they can do. They get money to fix up and improve, but they're not adding additional units. The public-private partnership that's going to be happening up North Street in the Housing Authority property will be a mix of nearly 500 market rate, affordable and low-income apartments that will be available. Naturally, instead of 2 stories, we're going to be seeing multi-story buildings up there. There's several iterations of design that have gone on, but that's going to be the real major solution, is the public-private partnerships in order to make the units available that we really need to help assist in solving the problem.
Yeah, we've been looking at some interesting stats, as you know, because I've seen you at several of them. Our spring Resi Stat meetings are going on right now. And you may have seen these stats as well, where, over the years, state aid has been dropping off, our federal block grant funding has been dropping off, at the same time that real estate prices have been going up. So it's made it harder for the city and nonprofits to, purchase units or even build in some cases. So as you were mentioning, that finding some creative partnerships has been sort of key in that effort.
It's really the economic salvation for the city because, as I mentioned, the state and the federal government are not there to provide funding, and basically all they can do is really provide some resources if we're able to get to a point where we can get a partnership like we're talking about up at North Street, which right now is moving ahead. But we have to see more of that here in the city, especially where we are such an attractive community right now. Brooklyn, Somerville, one of the top places in the country that people seek out because they're close to, we're so close to Boston, Brooklyn being so close to New York City. It's a place where people want to be. And gee, it's great that we have the demand, but we don't have the supply of housing. And so it just drives the cost up. Economics 101, unfortunately, is ruling the day right now. So we're doing our efforts to be as creative as possible. Bringing the Green Line here, though, is probably going to be the economic salvation for the city in many respects, because we're going to have a lot of people staying here, raising families here.
Right.
The fact that we're building a brand new high school in the next 5 years is really very exciting to me personally, having grown up here and seen over the last several years how much additional monies we put into the elementary school system, to the point now where young people, they decide to get married and start raising a family. They're staying and they're not moving out to the suburbs. They're staying here because they like living in a city that's diverse, that's got a lot of character and just so many choices, no matter what your age. There's something here from everybody from 6 to 60, and I can attest to that from talking and seeing so many people interacting throughout the city, whether it be in parks, playgrounds, at theaters, and the squares. It's a place where people want to be, and I'm just really thrilled to be able to still have the energy to want to keep achieving some of that progress.
Sure.
Incrementally, it's improving.
Definitely. Along with changes in transit coming with the Green Line, something that has been going on and folks will be noticing more as the weather gets warmer is more biking around the city. And May happens to be Bike Safety Month, and I know with your work, again, on the Committee on Public Health and Public Safety, making the roads safer for everyone has been
sharing
a
the
focus.
roads. There
Exactly.
are people that are going to be walking, running, they're biking. My Public Health and Safety Committee has had very active relationships with the Transportation Department, with Brad Rawson, with the police, with the Somerville Bicycle Commission. Our meetings basically focus on how to improve safety for riders and for pedestrians and vehicle operators. In light of the problems we've seen here in the greater Boston area in the past year, some real tragedies have occurred in Boston and Cambridge. We're trying to make improvements. We have over 100 miles of streets here in the city, so working on the main bikeways here in the city, Beacon Street, Somerville Ave. There are a lot of places that people make use of. So we're making the improvements. You've seen all the painting that's going on to let people know that the bikes are on the road. They have to share the road. The education component is the most important thing, Megan. Yeah. We're trying to prevent drivers from opening their driver door into an oncoming bike. People getting doored has been an issue that happens. And then during the day doing my insurance work, I've seen more than a few incidents where drivers have doored bikers and some serious accidents can occur. So that's a major focus to get people to be cognizant to reach with their right hand, look, so they'll see the mirror before they open the door. So those little educational components are going on, but we've got an active group of people who are involved with improving bike safety and making improvements to share the road.
Yeah, and as you probably know, we have some new kind of flyers going out in all the permit renewals, letting folks know what some of those bike markings mean, what the rules for both vehicles and bikes, because sometimes people don't know. It's not something that's on the driver's test. And also the recent drop in speed limit, which I know the board was very supportive of.
Well,
as well.
Being safe is the most important thing. Reducing that speed. People say, well, it might only be 5 miles an hour, but anybody who drives knows that the difference between 20 miles an hour, 25 or 30 miles an hour, especially on our city of Somerville streets, which are very crowded, parking sometimes on both sides. So yes, we're very aware of that, and I think that 5 mile an hour difference in many cases is going to make a huge improvement in the perception that pedestrians and vehicle operators have. So I think as we look at the numbers, and we're very data-driven here in Somerville, we'll be looking at those incidents of occurrences as we go down the road. I'm very happy that we're able to get that done thanks to the help with the state delegation. It was a real community effort to get those speed limits reduced, and I think we're going to be very optimistic with seeing the results.
And I know you are an active runner as well. So, and pedestrian infrastructure is also a part of that. So, are there things that you've noticed, especially over the years that you've been out running that have changed or improved?
Oh, I can tell you, we could go on and do a whole show on that. We are, thanks to the efforts of a lot of us here in the city, we are a runner-friendly community. Not only do we have marked and safe pathways like the community path from now Lowell Street down to Davis Square, but we have local organizations we have some running clubs who are very active and doing community service in addition to getting together and run. They also give back to the community, and so I've been very pleased to be involved with some of those organizations, and the fact that we put on events and races that will benefit community efforts. Paul Collier and the Somerville Road Runners have been tremendous in having events that not only are promoting great personal health, but also the proceeds in many cases come back directly to Somerville nonprofit organizations like the High School Scholarship Fund, the High School Track Team, Frisbee Club, a lot of things that might not get some support. These races benefit, and the Road Runners Club of America designation basically signifies that yes, we get it. Not only do we like to run, but we also give back to the community and make it safe. So we're actively involved with public safety campaign to make sure that all our roadways and walkways are illuminated and safe. A lot of women run at 9, 10 o'clock at night, and if I bump into them and I'll say, geez, what do you feel? And they'll tell me, I feel safe. It's a perception that if I can come down the community path, I'm not afraid of a problem. I feel safe because of the good lighting, phone technology in the path. So many people are on that path going to the Red Line stop in Davis. So it's extremely grateful when you hear those kind of words that people feel that way.
And coming up now at the end of May, the city is going to be celebrating Memorial Day and honoring our veterans. And this year, we're kind of having a whole week of activities. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, I'm sure you've marched in many of the Memorial Day parades.
And I certainly have, and it's been an honor, thrill, as both my mother and father were World War II veterans. My dad served in the Army and was in the European Theater on Anzio Beach, and my mother served in the Navy and spent several years working. So the fact that we can remember all those individuals who fortunately didn't come back from some of those conflicts, from Korea, from Vietnam, and from the conflicts we've seen in the Middle East. This is our way of saying thanks and not forgetting those wonderful sacrifices for our veterans. With our Heroes celebration this on Saturday before the Memorial Day Parade will be a unique experience, and one that will be a very solemn occasion recognizing individuals for their extraordinary contributions. The Memorial Day Parade is going to be a little different this year because it's not going to go all the way to the veteran cemeteries we have in the past, but we're going to have a special night for the veteran cemetery to honor the memory of those Somerville people who sacrificed their lives in order for us to live as we do today. So it's going to be a terrific event. Brian Bishop, our veterans coordinator, has done an outstanding job. He and Kathy have really got the foundation ready for what appears to be a terrific week. And the very last Memorial Day celebration will be a wonderful fireworks concert that will happen down at Assembly Square right at the edge of the Mystic River. It'll be the last event going on Memorial Day weekend. So I think we've got it planned out so that we're honoring local heroes, remembering via the parade the Memorial Day for the country, and that by having the special celebration down at Assembly Square will give everybody an opportunity to enjoy and to conclude that great week of memorial. So we're looking forward to it in a big way.
Yeah, and just for anyone who's watching this prior to the parade, it's actually going to be a week earlier this year, the Sunday before Memorial Day, to kind of kick off all of those celebrations. And
I think it's going to make it easier for us too as a city. We can attract even more participants, the bands and drum and bugle corps, the various groups that march are a little more available, and we're always looking at the money side of it. Might be a little less expensive that week as opposed to the day before actual Memorial Day. So I think it's going to work out well, and we made some good adjustments, and so it should be a good 3 hours long, and that right now it looks like the weather forecast is going to go pretty well, so that's the big thing that should go for us.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be great, and I've heard there are going to be some interesting surprises in Davis Square where the parade ends. So again, if you're watching this before the parade, that's where you may want to head to watch.
It should be a good time, and living nearby in Davis, I've heard little rumblings that some interesting things are going to happen. So if you're going to be there, it should be a good time. And if you see this afterwards, I hope it turned out to be everything we expected.
Yes. And of course, if you miss the Memorial Day celebrations, that is just sort of the kickoff of all of our spring and summer activities in Davis and around the city, which I know I see you at many of them, the Summer Streets events and the Art Beat.
And that's why everybody seems to want to be part of, want to come to Somerville, because we do so many things that involve fun, recreational activity. They're family friendly, they're healthy, and they're nearby. You can walk to them, and that's the great attraction. Even though we've got 85,000 people in 4 square miles, people know how to be neighbors in Somerville. You grow up knowing that if Mr. Murphy next door has to be out the door at 6 a.m., you might be a little more less noisy by 9 o'clock at night. So your neighbors can have some peace. Or if you hear some music playing outside, okay, you're going to be a little more tolerant, especially on a Friday night. So people learn how to be neighbors here very quickly.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Alderman Connolly, and thank you for tuning in to Alderman at Work. We will see you next time.